The International Automobile Federation did not just punish Hamilton and Gasly. It may have accidentally put itself on trial. Monaco was supposed to be about precision, pressure, and survival between the walls. Instead, it became a penalty storm. Hamilton was hit with 5 seconds. Gasly lost a podium and fell from 3rd to 7th. And when the same pit lane issue kept striking driver after driver, the paddock stopped asking who made a mistake. They started asking whether the system itself was wrong. Now Hamilton wants answers. Alpine is pushing back. Ferrari is watching every detail. And the International Automobile Federation is facing the one accusation no governing body can afford: that the race result may have been shaped by invisible numbers nobody outside the control room fully understands. Because if the measurements were right, the teams have a painful lesson to accept. But if they were wrong, Monaco was not just controversial. It was a warning that Formula One's most famous street race may have been decided behind a closed door. Before this goes any deeper, subscribe to the channel. Monaco is the one place where a 5-second penalty does not feel like 5 seconds. Feels like a locked door. Because on most Formula One circuits, damage can still be repaired. A driver can attack on a straight. A team can change strategy. Fresh tires can bring a race back to life. A safety car can reset everything. Even after a mistake, there is often one more chance waiting somewhere on the lap. But Monaco does not offer chances that easily. Monaco is narrow, slow, beautiful, and brutal. The walls sit so close that every corner feels like a warning. The driver is not just racing the car ahead. He is racing the barriers, the rhythm, the pressure, and the knowledge that one mistake can turn a promising weekend into a photograph of broken carbon fiber. That is why track position in Monaco is almost sacred. If you have it, you protect it. If you lose it, you may never get it back. And that is exactly why the pit lane penalties exploded into something much bigger than a normal post-race argument. Because when Hamilton was given 5 seconds for exceeding the pit lane speed limit, it did not land like a small correction. It landed like a race-changing blow. The official rule was clear. The pit lane limit was 60 kilometers per hour. Safety in the pit lane matters, and nobody serious inside Formula One would argue otherwise. Mechanics stand there. Officials stand there. Team members move around cars that are still hot, sharp, and dangerous. The speed limit is not decoration. It exists to protect people. But the controversy was never really about whether the rule should exist. The controversy was about whether the rule was enforced in a way that everyone could trust. And that is where Monaco became uncomfortable. Because Hamilton was not alone. That single detail changes the entire story. If one driver gets punished, the easy answer is driver error. Maybe he entered too fast. Maybe the limiter came on too late. Maybe the team left too little margin. The sport argues for a day and then the conversation moves on. But when several drivers are hit by the same kind of penalty in the same race, the focus shifts. It no longer feels like one isolated mistake. It starts to feel like a pattern. And in Formula One, patterns scare people. A pattern means teams start digging. Engineers start comparing data. Drivers start asking whether their dashboards told the full truth. Team principals start choosing their words carefully in front of cameras, while behind closed doors the questions become much sharper. Where exactly was the speed measured? Were the sensors calibrated correctly? Did the detection line behave as expected? Did the official data match what the team saw inside the car? Those questions may sound technical, but the heart of them is simple. Was the ruler straight? That is the question Monaco placed in front of the International Automobile Federation. Not whether safety matters. Not whether the pit lane limit should be ignored, but whether the system measuring that limit was clear, consistent, and strong enough to decide a result at the most unforgiving race on the calendar. And the timing made it even more explosive. Hamilton's move to Ferrari was never just a driver transfer. It was a statement. Ferrari did not bring in a 7-time world champion to quietly accept damage and move on. They brought him in because he understands how championships are built and how championships can be lost. Not always through dramatic crashes. Not always through engine failures. Sometimes through small cuts. A 5-second penalty here. A missed opportunity there. A result that looks acceptable in the moment until months later, when the standings tighten and every lost point becomes a question nobody can escape. Hamilton knows that feeling. Ferrari knows it too. So when Monaco produced a penalty that affected Hamilton's result, the reaction inside Maranello could never be casual. Ferrari had to look beyond the number on the timing screen. They had to ask whether this was a one-off problem or a warning about something that could return later in the season. Because if the team cannot fully trust how pit lane speed is being measured, then every future stop becomes slightly more complicated. Maybe the engineers add more safety margin to the limiter. Maybe Hamilton enters the pit lane a touch more carefully. Maybe Ferrari sacrifices a tiny amount of time to avoid another punishment. That may sound responsible, but in Formula One, a tiny amount of time is not tiny. It can decide whether an undercut works. It can decide whether a driver comes out ahead or behind. It can decide whether a podium is saved or lost. And at Monaco, those tiny margins become enormous. That is why Hamilton's demand for answers carries so much weight. It is not only about frustration. It is about certainty. A driver can live with a hard rule if he knows exactly where the line is. He can adapt. He can adjust. He can drive with discipline. But when the line feels invisible, or when too many drivers suddenly trip over it at once, discipline turns into doubt. And doubt is dangerous. Doubt changes how a driver behaves. It sits in the back of the mind during the next pit entry. It makes a team hesitate. It makes engineers wonder whether they are fighting the other cars, or fighting a measurement process they cannot fully see. That is the pressure Ferrari now faces. Because Hamilton and Ferrari may have had the biggest headline, but Alpine has the clearest emotional wound. Hamilton's 5 seconds hurt because of the championship picture, because of Ferrari's pressure, because of his status, and because Monaco gives no room to recover. But Gasly's penalty hurt in a more visible way. The audience saw a podium vanish. That matters because fans do not experience Formula One like engineers. They do not sit inside the garage comparing sensor logs and calibration files. They watch the race. They follow the positions. They feel the tension. They see a driver cross the line, and they believe the story has reached its ending. When that ending changes afterward, the explanation has to be strong. If it is not, the emotional reaction becomes stronger than the official result. That is why the word unjust is now carrying so much weight. It may not be the legal conclusion. It may not be the final ruling. But emotionally, it captures what many people felt after Monaco. They felt that something had been taken away through a process they could not see clearly enough to trust. And Alpine understood that feeling instantly. Because for a team like Alpine, rare success matters differently. Ferrari expects to fight at the front. Hamilton expects pressure. Mercedes expects victories. But Alpine does not arrive at every weekend assuming a podium is waiting. When an opportunity appears, especially at Monaco, the team has to grab it with both hands. Gasly did that on the road. Then the result sheet took it away. That is why Alpine's challenge becomes the sharpest weapon in this entire story. If they can make the International Automobile Federation reopen the discussion, the pressure does not stay limited to Gasly. It spreads backward through the race. People will ask whether the same systems measured Hamilton correctly. They will ask whether other drivers were caught by the same issue. They will ask whether the Monaco pit lane created conditions that made the readings unusually sensitive. And the more those questions multiply, the more dangerous this becomes for the governing body. Because a governing body does not only need to be correct. It needs to be trusted as correct. That difference is brutal. The International Automobile Federation may have perfectly valid data. It may be able to prove that every penalty was applied correctly. If that is true, then the teams will have to accept the pain. Alpine will have to accept that Gasly lost the podium because the limit was exceeded. Ferrari will have to accept that Hamilton's 5 seconds were earned. Every team involved will have to review its pit lane systems and build more margin into future races. That outcome would be hard but clean. But if Alpine's review reveals even a small weakness, the story becomes far more explosive. Because then the question is no longer, did Gasly speed? The question becomes, how many results were shaped by a system that was not fully reliable? That is the thread the International Automobile Federation cannot allow to unravel. Because once teams believe a measuring system can be beaten in review, they will never look at similar penalties the same way again. Every future pit lane speeding punishment will be examined through the memory of Monaco. Every driver will ask for the data. Every team will compare its telemetry against the official reading. Every close call will become a potential fight. That is how one race becomes a precedent. And precedent is one of the most powerful things in Formula One politics. A rule can sit quietly for years, until one controversial weekend changes how everyone sees it. A penalty can seem routine until the wrong race, the wrong driver, and the wrong pattern expose the weakness around it. Then suddenly the entire paddock starts moving differently. That may be happening now. Because Monaco did not produce a single clean controversy. It produced layers. Hamilton's penalty created the superstar angle. Ferrari's reaction created the political angle. Gasly's fall created the emotional angle. Alpine's right of review created the legal angle. and the repeated pit lane penalties created the system angle. Put all of that together, and the International Automobile Federation is not just defending a decision anymore. It is defending the credibility of its process. That is why the answer cannot be vague, cannot hide behind the phrase rules are rules. That phrase only works when everybody trusts how the rule was enforced. In Monaco, the enforcement itself is what people are questioning. So the governing body has to make the invisible visible. Where exactly was the speed measured? How was it measured? Was the system calibrated correctly? Did the official sensor data match the team's telemetry? Were there any unusual conditions in the pit lane? Why did so many drivers receive similar penalties in the same Grand Prix? These questions sound technical, but the real meaning is simple. Was the ruler straight? That is the entire controversy in one sentence. If the ruler was straight, the drivers crossed the line. Painful, maybe harsh, but fair. If the ruler was not straight, then Monaco was not just strict. It was distorted. And that possibility is what gives Alpine's move so much force. Because Alpine does not need to prove that every penalty was wrong to shake confidence. It only needs to create serious doubt around one part of the system. Once doubt exists, every similar case becomes emotionally connected, even if the legal facts differ. That is how mistrust spreads. Not through proof at first, through patterns that feel wrong. And Monaco felt wrong to a lot of people because the punishment wave did not match what the audience could easily see. Fans did not watch a pit lane full of visibly reckless driving. They watched names fall down the order after the race had already built its emotional shape. They saw a podium disappear. They saw Hamilton's Ferrari result clouded by controversy. They saw a famous race become a debate about censors and stewarding. That is not the kind of drama Formula One wants. The sport loves tension. It loves rivalry. It loves arguments about strategy, tire choices, brave moves, and pressure. But it does not benefit when the central argument becomes whether the system controlling the race can be trusted. That kind of controversy leaves damage. It is now about how Formula One governs itself when the result becomes controversial. It is about whether teams feel heard when they bring evidence. It is about whether a champion like Hamilton can demand answers without being dismissed as emotional. It is about whether a team like Alpine can challenge a lost podium without being told to simply accept the table. And underneath all of that sits the simplest, most uncomfortable question in the paddock. If the official result and the team data point in different directions, which one should fans believe? That question is powerful because it does not have an easy answer. The official system must lead or the sport becomes chaos. But the official system must also prove its reliability or authority becomes arrogance. Teams cannot be allowed to rewrite every result they dislike. But governing bodies cannot expect blind faith when penalties reshape a Grand Prix. That is the balance Monaco shattered. And that is why Alpine's move is so important. It forces the International Automobile Federation to step out from behind the penalty sheet and explain the machinery of the decision. It forces Ferrari to consider whether Hamilton's case is part of something bigger. It forces fans to look at Monaco not only as a race, but as a test of whether Formula One's invisible systems are strong enough to carry visible consequences. Because Gasly's lost podium is not just a sad Alpine story. It is the key that may unlock the whole controversy. If Alpine fails, the governing body will claim the system held. Ferrari may still demand clarity, but the storm could slowly weaken. Hamilton will carry the frustration forward, and teams will adjust their pit lane procedures with more caution. But if Alpine succeeds, even partially, then Monaco becomes the race that exposed a fault line. Suddenly, Hamilton's demand for a probe looks less like anger and more like instinct. Ferrari's frustration looks less like politics and more like protection. And the International Automobile Federation's credibility problem becomes impossible to ignore. That is the real threat. Not that one penalty was unpopular. Not that one team was angry. But that the same Monaco afternoon may have given multiple teams the same reason to question the same system. A sport can survive a bad decision. It struggles to survive a broken pattern. And as Alpine pushes forward, Hamilton and Ferrari will be watching closely, because the answer to Gasly's case may quietly decide how far this revolt can go.